thing that came out of the Nicene Creed was, the Council of Nicaea was the Nicene Creed. The purpose of the creed on the surface was stated to be to unify and or to universalize the churches. Now, the word Catholic only means universal. So this is where the beginning of the foundation came. The purpose of that council at Nicaea was we need to get everybody speaking the same language and saying the same thing and agreeing with the same doctrines. We got people baptizing a little differently there and some a little differently there, and we got some saying different words, and the communion, some people are doing this sacrament and some are not. And you saw that in the New Testament. The New Testament had that. When Paul wrote to the Corinthians, he wrote to the Corinthians, y'all got to stop all this speaking in tongues. People come in, they think y'all are crazy. Now, if somebody just thinks they got to, let one speak. And if there's nobody there to interpret, let him sit down and shut up. Because he's not edified anybody. And hey, this communion thing, this isn't for you to bring a feast. And y'all are bringing food and wine, and some of you are getting drunk. That's what he wrote to the Corinthians. Some of y'all are getting drunk. Now, you scan through Ephesians, Galatians, Philippians, Colossians, Thessalonians. He never talks those topics to any other church. None of those churches got a lecture on speaking in tongues or any instructions about it. None of those churches got that same kind of lecture about, y'all stop, you're getting drunk. None of them. What was he doing? He was addressing the needs of that church. That territory was out of control. The Corinthians were nutty. Those Greeks were going wild. And Paul wrote them the letter they needed to calm them down, correct them. Don't feel guilty because you got to all stop yelling and hollering in tongues. That's what he told them. You don't see that read in Pentecostal or charismatic churches today, but that's what he said. Now, he wasn't telling them to stop altogether. He said, don't forbid to speak with tongues. But hey, all of you, you hear my Pentecostal friends today have adopted this word, the prayer language. Come on, pray in your prayer language. That is so blasphemous. That's sacrilegious. You can't pray in your prayer language. You can't voluntarily say, okay, I'm going to speak in other tongues right now, because the very foundation for that verse was they spoke in other tongues as the Spirit gave them the words and the utterance. And you got these television gurus that started coming along, and my word, I've seen them get up there and say, look, you need to speak in tongues. I'm going to give you your first 3 syllables, and then you just go from there. And they give them 3 silly things to say, and then they just take off. That's not biblical. And if I was the Apostle Paul, I'd write them a stern letter and say, hey, you got to stop that. But I wouldn't stop it to my Baptist friends over there, because they're not doing that. Paul wrote what the churches needed to hear. God in his oversight knew that there are going to be a lot of different kinds of people and a lot of different practices. So I'm going to make sure that Paul gets to see all of them. And he's going to write to this church and that church and that church and that church. And in each one of them, he's going to address needs that are going to crop up forever. And by that, every church from now on will be able to find their instructions in the Word of God. And so that's what happened, but not at Nicaea. At Nicaea, they decided they needed to describe everything that they wanted described. And then the drawback to Nicaea was, for the first time ever, the powers that be, still not called Catholic, still no Pope in place, but the men who grabbed that edict at Nicaea did not use it to go out and teach churches and bring them into an understanding and a uniformity. They used that to execute hundreds, thousands of ministers and preachers who would not agree with the exact wording of the Nicene Creed.